Hello, and welcome to the Peak State Fit Experience podcast, recorded from the Peak State Fit Performance Center in Salt Lake City, Utah. You are listening to our 5th episode. This is the first season of our podcast, and we'll follow the modules in the Nail Your First IRONMAN course, which is now available for $189. I created the course with 35 video lessons covering the 4 pillars of IRONMAN: swim, bike, run, and nutrition, plus tips from my 34 years of racing experience and 20 years of coaching experience. Peak State Fit has placed an importance on education since our inception. Our business mission is to share knowledge and empower others through education. Last week in our show, we talked about setting goals with Coach Jen Rulon. And you can head back over to catch that on Spotify or YouTube. And please hit the subscribe and give us a 5-star rating after listening to the show. We really appreciate that. So this week, we are going to talk about equipment selection for your first Ironman. And we have guest Pat Casey, my husband and owner of Peak State Fit, with me. And I brought Pat on today because with equipment selection for triathlon, really one of the most expensive things that you'll buy is your bike and things to go along with the bike. And so what better expert than to cover bikes than Pat? So Pat, I'll let you do a brief introduction. Most people listening to this might know you, but they may not know either one of us if they're listening for the first time and not familiar. So introduce yourself, and then we'll talk about the equipment selection.
Sure thing. Yeah, happy to be on and excited to cover this topic because it's a big conversation piece with clients we have coming into the studio. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Pat Casey. I am a coach, bike fitter, and elite road racer, own a domestic elite racing team, which is sort of like a pro-am team that travels around and races. None of us do that exclusively. We all have day jobs, but we have a passion for racing and competition and getting to travel around and ride bikes in cool places. So but my main hat that I wear here and every day is as a consultant for athletes, primarily long course triathletes, and even people that are more recreational that are always trying to find better experience through bike fit, through movement, and through what we provide at Peak State Fit through this experience-based model that we've developed.
Yeah, great introduction. And so with that, we're going to dive into our first question. And so, again, I remind our guests and the people listening to the show that this can apply to all triathletes, but we are particularly going back into that beginner's mindset of someone who might be researching doing their very first Ironman. So what advice would you give this athlete, a beginner athlete, looking for their very first bike? They don't have a bike at all. So what are some of those steps, knowing that they are going to do an Ironman on this bike?
It's a great question. I think, especially for the full distance Ironman discussion and 70.3, it's a really crucial piece of equipment to understand, the main differences between a road bike and a triathlon bike, the benefits that you're going to get from one to the other. And, if you're on a budget and you're only going to buy one bike for this endeavor, and that might grow into something more advanced later. I think having something more versatile, if you're just going to have one, if we had an unlimited budget, and we didn't have to consider cost, then buying one of each is probably the best way to go. Mostly because there's a tremendous amount of benefit to having a road bike, and I would say if you're going to just buy one bike, getting a road bike is an important thing because it will open more doors for you to meet people through training. So the main differences of a road bike to a triathlon bike are in the geometry of the bike, and then of course in the components that make up where you put your hands and how your body is naturally going to be positioned on that bike. A road bike is your traditional drop handlebar. It has a curve in it that, you have all these different hand positions, but the brakes and the shifters are all in one spot. The geometry is going to be a more upright position where you're positioned on your hands, seated. In the bike fitting world, we like to describe this as being a bit more of a slack geometry, as opposed to a steeper geometry, which is more of a triathlon setup. On a triathlon bike, your body will be more forward. The muscles that you're going to use are going to be slightly different. It'll be a little bit more quad, a little bit more glute, a little bit less hamstring and cap, and your elbows will rest on the handlebars. The main difference for a beginner is that your gearing and your brakes on most triathlon bikes are in two different places. There's gearing and shifters up on what we call the extensions, where your hands will be when your elbows are rested on the pads. And then your brakes will be on what are called the bull horns or the base bar. And if you have electronic shifting, there will be some shifters down there too, most likely. But your shifters and your brakes are most often going to be separate positions on the bike. Obviously, if you're just getting into the sport, that can be a challenging piece to get used to and to overcome. So I think your athleticism, your experience with riding is going to be a big part of that discussion. And then, of course, too, this is sort of our next topic, is getting into what's going to be the best bike for that task. And if you're trying to make the position on the road bike achievable to getting into an aerodynamic position, like adding a set of clip-on aero extensions, you want to make sure that the components on that bike allow you to be a little bit further forward than a traditional road setup. And then also that the reach of the frame and the stack is going to accommodate for your ability to actually comfortably get those elbows into those pads at an appropriate angle of your torso and your back.
Yeah, I don't want to jump too far ahead because we actually have an entire question dedicated to talking about using aerobar extensions on a road bike. And for this particular, really just getting into that very first question of somebody trying to select a bike, I'd love if you would share a little bit more about maybe what is a pre-purchase sizing fit and the importance of making sure that someone buys the correct size and that not all sizes are consistent across the industry.
Yep. Yeah. So anywhere you live in the country, there's probably a resource that can speak to these elements. But without any context, they're very challenging to understand. If you look at a bike manufacturer's website and you look at the geometry chart, you'll see all these numbers in millimeters, and they're very specific to each brand. So what we do with the pre-purchase fit is sort of help peel back some of the layers of what those sizes mean and why they're important in terms of your body, your dimensions, your flexibility. And some brands might work better for you than others. As Heather mentioned with the continuation of looking for that size. If it's a small, medium, large size, that will be different between Canyon, which tend to run very small for I guess they are just inconsistent with brands like Trek and brands like Specialized. And so there's, you have to sort of look at that geometry chart and allow a little bit of space for you to understand it from the context of specific sizing. And so within a pre-purchase fit, you would come in, we would go through some basic flexibility, ranges of motion, previous injury discussion, distance of races that you're going to be looking into doing. And then we would get you onto a fit bike. And the fit bike
Mm-hmm.
is really cool. It's able to basically modify itself around any bike position that any bike that exists. So based upon the stack and the reach geometry, and then the seat tube angle, we can position you and fabricate a position that would simulate a real bike. So what you would leave with,
and we know from this, the past year, our experience in Peak State Fit, seeing the increase in pre-purchase sizing fits that we're doing. And I love that because I feel like getting an athlete on the right bike the first time rather than, having a possible experience of having the wrong size or simply a geometry, because we've seen that too. I don't think that Kayla would mind us sharing, a story from her bike experience where she was on a bike frame that she thought she liked. She came and had a bike fit with you. It was working well for her, I should say. But then, she got hit by a car in Ironman, Arizona, and ended up destroying that bike. And then when she bought a new bike, she went with the Cervelo. And she said, that geometry, she could tell that first ride, that geometry worked better for her body than her previous selection.
Yep. Yeah. And I think the characteristics of people's anatomical dimensions and what their pre-fit will determine, you can't find that stuff out on your own unless you went out and rode every bike that, exists, which is really hard. Most cycling shops don't carry tri bikes. It's not an easy bike to sit on, not easy inventory to carry. We've been in the bike industry. I've been in the bike industry for almost 20 years now. And they're few and far between shops that actually stock TT bikes. So the pre-purchase size and fit is so important for this specific niche, because it is so hard to track down bikes if you can't just get your hands on them and be able to actually ride that position and see what that different length feels like, and making adjustments to that fit bike just to simulate what you're going to get. That peace of mind is just invaluable.
Yeah. And I wanted to go back for just a moment before we go to our next topic to discuss, again, if you don't have a bike at all, that road bike versus tri-bike selection. I think Pat and I both agree, and I just wanted to emphasize that the enjoyment of owning a bike, that a road bike is going to be a better selection for you. You're going to be able to go on group rides with other people. You'll be able to do other types of rides like big mountain canyon climbs more comfortably than in your tri-bike. Mm-hmm. So if you can only get one, I would get a road bike. And then if you can get two. And more. And plus
you'll
one,
always use that road bike. And the fun thing about the road bike is it just opens, like you said, it just opens so many avenues for you to be able to explore and experience where you live in a different way. There's, I think cycling infrastructure in a lot of areas in the country is improving. But yeah, even if you're just trying to get used to being out on the bike, that, riding on bike paths on a tri-bike is miserable, because you can't transition from that arrow position to that upright position over and over again. If there's street crossings, it's just not as viable of an option. So I think the learning.
Yeah. Glad we agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So our next topic, we are going to talk about cycling apparel, or what we refer to in the industry as your kit, your cycling kit, your tri-kit. And I think, Pat, you're also such a great person for me to ask this question to, because you do so many bike fits. I mean, this past year you did 427 bike fits in 2022, and you see people on their bikes in their clothes that they bring to our studio. And a lot of times we will hear people say, well, I can't get comfortable on my saddle. Now, there's lots of reasons for that, and that's for a different topic to talk about saddles specifically. But a lot of times we'll look at somebody on this, gorgeous new bike that costs more than most people's cars, but they have on these crappy clothing. We're like, your chamois is so bad. You need some better clothing. So talk to us. Tell us what we should be doing.
Oh, yeah. The clapped out chamois is like the bane of my existence, I think, because people have this emotional connection to their chamois, but you wouldn't run in a pair of running shoes for 3 years. Why would you buy a $75 pair of cycling shorts at Dick's Sporting Goods and think that that's going to carry you through an Ironman? I don't understand. There's this huge disconnect between quality of chamois and its impact on your riding experience. So yeah, providing some education here is really important. I think especially from a fundamental standpoint in talking to beginners, this is such a huge missed opportunity, and people just succumb to the idea that, oh, well, riding my bike should just be uncomfortable. I should be chafed and have, saddle sores. That's just part of it, I guess. And I'm here to tell you that's not acceptable. We're in
it's not
day and age where you can get your hands on a really high quality pair of shorts that are going to last you a really long time. That it might sting on the onset because you've never spent that much money on Lycra before, but I promise you it will change your experience when you get into these 3, 4, 5 hour bike rides. You will be thanking me for telling you to go buy these shorts. Everybody is a little bit different, and I think there is an important variable that, going and trying on bib shorts at most bike shops is not unattainable. Usually shops will carry cycling shorts. But having a really nice pair of cycling bib shorts, and I say bibs specifically because when you're training, especially if you're training inside, you don't have that variable of having to go to the bathroom when you're out on the road. The bib shorts are a pair of cycling shorts with a shoulder strap. So what that shoulder strap does is achieves really its main function is keeping the chamois and the shorts in the same position as they're designed to be in. Without that chamois, the shorts tend to slide down, and the chamois just migrates to wherever it ends up, and you sit on it. So that's a big piece. And then, looking for a pair of shorts that doesn't have seams in precarious places. We've seen
absolutely
too many pairs of shorts ruin people's training rides, or cause such severe chafing during a race that the run is just an absolute sufferfest. And we don't need to suffer unnecessarily. We're going to be suffering enough with our bodies and the experience that we're having soft tissue damage is not or having abrasions on our skin is not something that I think anybody of us want to experience. So really being intentional about looking at that chamois, making sure that when you try it on, that there aren't areas that feel like they're creating pressure or creating any acute points. And this is a shameless plug, but there's a reason why we're working with Ossos of Switzerland now, and on multiple levels. They are a partner in Peak State Fit because the short is honestly the most comfortable piece of cycling apparel I've ever worn. As somebody who's worn a chamois while they're riding their bike for 20 plus years, I've never thrown on a pair of shorts out of the bag and ridden it with as much comfort as I have with a pair of Ossos bib shorts. Their chamois are
100% agree.
They are a game changer. And I remember getting Heather her first pair of Ossos bibs, and it was just this. It's almost an unfair experience where it will ruin you for any other pairs of bib shorts. I always say it's like a a piece of clothing unto itself. There's so much that goes into each pair of these shorts, and the chamois that has been constructed is above and beyond the nicest chamois. There are no seams in the chamois, so it sort of eliminates that discussion of having there be chafing from a seam in an unnecessary place. The chamois that is not sewn into the short, it actually is it's designed to essentially cradle your undercarriage in a way that doesn't produce more friction. It allows you to sort of move around on the saddle naturally. As your anatomy moves with each pedal stroke, your chamois should move with you. And so it carries that philosophy that, it's the only thing that's separating your body from your saddle. So whether you have the most comfortable saddle in the world is irrelevant, because a lot of saddle sores and discomfort is caused by friction. It's not necessarily by pressure. You combine pressure and friction, then you have an uncomfortable situation.
Right. And I'd like to add to that specifically in that I think women especially, I don't know if this is as common with men, but I know a lot of times women associate more padding with more comfort. But a lot of times more padding, so adding extra layers, I've heard of people trying to wear 2 bib shorts or putting a gel cover over their saddle. When you create more layers, you're creating more friction, more places for heat. And so that is most of the time not going to create more comfort to add more layers.
Yep. Yeah. And even the saddle height and bike fit discussion, the more thickness you add, the more you're changing elements.
You change your bike fit.
So there's, I think getting into a pair of bib shorts, do it right the first time. Don't be afraid of a little bit of compression. They should be very snug. They should not be easy to slide on. They should be well fitted. And they shouldn't sag down. And a lot of times when we talk about shorts in the bike fit studio with people on older pairs of shorts, you'll actually see space in the undercarriage where there's, someone is riding and there's just, it's almost like the shorts are sort of falling down, and it will totally change someone's comfort if you position the chamois in the right spot and give them the padding in the place where it needs it. And then maybe a little bit less of the design of the chamois is cut to fit your anatomy. And so there's a lot to be learned there. And I think with each long course triathlete, having that be a big starting point, thinking about your contact points. So your shoes, your saddle, and your front end, your arm pads, and how your body is positioned and the comfort of those arm pads. Those are going to be the things that you can control and that you don't want to have to think about when you're 4 hours into the race. And this does bring about a nice transition. You're probably not going to race your full Ironman in your cycling kit unless you're not as concerned over time. And Heather, if I remember correctly, you did a full change in your first Ironman because
I did.
Your goal was to experience the day and have fun,
right,
and not be completely miserable. So tell me a little bit.
And it was Ironman Canada. It was a little chilly, and I wanted to make sure that I was warm enough. And so I did. I think my transition time was around 12 minutes in my first Ironman in T1. And I did make a full change from my wetsuit into a cycling kit. And then in T2 from my cycling kit to running clothes.
Yeah.
And, I was happy with that because I had a great experience in my first Ironman. It's one of my very favorite races. But I think that we can sort of discuss specificity in training, and that maybe do whether, you might not even know what you're going to. Most people, when they start training for a race, don't know what they're going to wear on race day. I know women in particular, we like to know that it's going to look good. Some people like to match their bike. Some people are on teams or tri clubs, and they may not have as much selection in what they're going to wear on race day if they want to associate, with their team or their club and wear whatever that is. So I would say with specificity, just make sure that once you know what you're going to wear on race day, that you are doing some of your training, especially in that like 8-week time period, which I call the time period of specificity, and then doing a lot of your training rides, though, in your most comfortable wear, which is going to be your Osso's bib shorts.
That's right. Yeah. And they do make tri-kits as well. Sky Moss has been sort of pilot for that program with it's been the first year that they've really developed a tri-suit and made it a more easily accessed custom kit. And so they take a while to get, but if you are interested in ordering one, we will be offering that to Peak State Fit athletes, and we'll push that out in social media. There's not an online store option, so we're sort of working through the logistics on how to effectively take in money, place the orders, get them all together, and then get those rolling. Yep. But luckily, we're in the beginning of this course, only 5 episodes in. So as we get that up and running, we'll update you, I'm sure. But yeah.
Okay, so I want to move on and talk about, you did brush up a little bit about adding aerobar extensions to a road bike. But if you, without getting too technical here, because we don't have a ton of time to spend on this topic, but maybe let's just focus on how you can prepare people to take some caution of you're not creating a triathlon bike. And I think that's what I really want to focus on, is that it's not the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And where should, so let's assume that we hope that people have access to a professional bike fitter and can maybe bring those aerobar extensions into their bike fitter to have that geometry changed. But a lot of people don't. A lot of people just buy aerobar extensions off the internet and put them on themselves.
Yeah. So I think one element to consider is, again, that slack and C-tube angle, the more kind of centered over the bottom bracket with your knee when you're at 3 o'clock, that position that you're going to take the road bike to try to fabricate this forward position. One element that people don't really consider is that the reach is totally off from what you might expect if you just threw on a set of aero bars and plop yourself down. You'll find that it's very challenging to create that much forward flexion comfortably and be able to produce any kind of good repeatable power, be able to breathe well. Obviously it's going to create a lot more extension in your neck. So having to, crane your head up when you're in this long extended position, it's just not optimal. So I think what we're probably looking for here is what are maybe some changes that, to the equipment that's already on that bike that will help you achieve an aero position easier. Again, first piece of advice, find a reputable bike fitter that has worked with triathletes and that is, experienced with this, because that's the number one thing. If you don't have access to that, we're happy to help. We do consult remotely, and we do a lot of virtual bike fitting with athletes all over the U.S. Even worked internationally with people, and it's helpful. But if you're going to do this yourself and you're going to try to achieve, making some modifications, the first thing you need to do is reduce that reach to the front end of the bike. And so creating a less slackened seat angle by positioning your saddle a little bit further forward. There are a few seat posts out there that will get you even further forward than zero offset seat post, but at the very least, getting yourself on a zero offset seat post, that means that the seat will be positioned more centered on that seat post as opposed to where there's occasionally what's called like a setback, so either 15 or 20 millimeters, that is designed to get that saddle further back. That's for a road bike. If you're trying to get yourself further forward, center that seat up, maybe knock it forward. As you come forward with your seat, it will reciprocate by shortening your distance to the bottom bracket. So you might have to raise your seat up a little bit. Go incrementally with this. Don't measure in inches, go in millimeters. I would say, it's about a 2-to-1 ratio. So, for every millimeter that you raise your seat, you'd have to bring it forward too. So sort of make it in that relationship, and take measurements. Don't be afraid to mark a spot on that seat. Center of the seat to the center of the bottom bracket is the most reliable. Make sure that is staying somewhat consistent as you come forward. What that's going to achieve is shortening that distance between your saddle and your handlebars. And then when you put those aero bars on, that will allow your hips to rotate a little easier, allow you to kind of get into that front end and begin to figure out what distance you want your aero pads and your extensions from your seat. Sometimes people need to shorten their stem a little bit. Sometimes people need to adjust the distance of the arm cups to the end of the extension. So there's all these little moving parts, and one piece will generally affect the next. So it's hard to not get too technical with it, but I think at the end of the day, it just heightens the importance that you find somebody that knows what they're doing and that can be a good resource for you as you go about this journey and figuring out what's the right position for me, what feels better when I run off the bike, how can I stay in this position for longer and not compromise my power output, my ability to eat and drink, and my ability to breathe effectively.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's probably the key takeaway of this entire show, is that we are all so highly individual. And so what works for one person doesn't work for the next, but it's not all about comfort. It's about, what does that do to your breathing? All the things you just said. So that is a key takeaway there. And that's a great thing to segue into, sort of the last, it's not really a question, but I have it phrased as a question. How do age, fitness, and biomechanics influence your equipment selection? Because I think that so in our studio, we see a lot of professionals that are, I would say a lot of them are over 40 doing their first Ironman. Some of them even older. We had, someone in the studio last week, 58 years old, training for Ironman, great shape. But what kind of considerations do we need to take from, that 58-year-old athlete as opposed to the 28-year-old athlete on maybe they're both buying the same bike? Because that's another thing, is that there aren't endless varieties of geometries available, but we can make adjustments to those geometries for the individual.
Yeah,
I didn't phrase that the best that I could, but
that's a good question. Yeah, and I think more than anything, it has to do with people's functional ability to load their joints accurately, to move in space without risk of compromise. And this is very unique among athletes, because I've seen athletes in their 30s who don't move as well as someone in their 60s. And that's because they just they have different genetics, they have different lifestyles, and I think too, there's a really large impact of our current state of technology and the impact that it's having on our ability to have good posture, to move well, to breathe fully. And This can also probably build into a bigger discussion, but I've had 14-year-old kids, high school mountain bike athletes, come in and not be able to touch their toes. And I think the older the athlete, the less of those impacts are magnified. And to the 30-year-old athlete, someone as myself, like kind of same age as myself, I'm 34, and I didn't grow up with the same devices that a lot of the young kids nowadays have. So I think that's a really big part of the discussion, is just looking at you as an individual. And so taking that into consideration does have a tremendous amount of impact on the selection of your bike, the position that we ultimately will put you in, and the level of the bike that you end up with. If you're I don't, care if you're a, Wall Street exec and you have all the money to work with, that P5 disc might not be the best bike for you if you can't reach the bullhorns from the position that we've placed you in the extensions. So the P series, the Cervelo P series, is just a different front end, and basically you can run a slightly higher position of those brake levers along with the aero extensions and create a more unifying variety of positions that accommodate you and your anatomical and functional fitness needs. And so that's kind of where that prefit discussion, again, we talk about not only the geometry of what we need from a stack and reach standpoint at your aero bars, but also what's that functional capacity of maybe your climbing position and where you're going to end up on your brakes and, your bullhorns for, getting out of the saddle. And taking a lot of that, like, okay, how much forward flexion can we achieve? And really heavily talk through, okay, what are going to be some of maybe this bike will work, but what are going to be some of the compromises that you're going to have to make, or what are going to be some of the additional elements you need to do in your daily routine to help you achieve this position better so that you're not debilitated coming off the bike and running a marathon.
Right. And that is not even, that's not selection, equipment selection, but that's not something we've even talked about in today's show, is that to achieve comfort on the bike for, consistently and long term, and to just, increase your chances of remaining injury free throughout all of your training with swimming, biking, and running, there's work that needs to be done. It's not just automated that a bike fit will create comfort. There are injury prevention exercises that we should be doing to build strength in areas to support us on the bike as well. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Well, I'm going to wrap things up for today. There's certainly so many areas that we can expand on, but we know that bike selection doesn't have to be complex if you seek the advice of a professional doing a pre-purchase sizing fit. And also, I think, considering with bike fit specifically, I wanted to wrap up saying it's not a one and done process. That your body changes, your fit changes with your body. So whether that's the aging process, whether you may become way more fit over the course of training for your Ironman. And so fitness can even change the way your muscles can interact with the bike. And so make sure that you follow up with your fitter. We offer 6 months of follow-up time complimentary at Peak State Fit because bike fit changes over time.
Yes. Yeah, and I think when we shed light on some of your areas of limitation, often they're functional and they're not something that are, that is entrenched in your DNA. They're things that can be changed. And if you work diligently about about those things, whether you're working with a PT or a strength coach, or you're just doing them on your own. We like to honor those changes, and we like to help you get more out of your bike position and your experience when you're training. And that's a big part of the discussion in moving forward and gaining awareness of your body and your ability to perform in all three sports. And kind of, giving you a sense of, these little incremental improvements can be very inspiring to those little process goals that you create in your training. And I think that's a really big piece to not discredit, and, having those people in your corner who really are there to help you get the most out of yourself. You have to lean on your team, your tribe, your family that you're creating through this experience. And so, really find those people and, communicate with them well, and make sure that you're honest with those people, because, they're going to be your advocates in this journey.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Pat. I think that there was a wealth of knowledge from today's episode. And one of the things we didn't get to talk about today, and I am going to end the show, is is race wheels and tire selection. And so maybe we'll come back and talk about that, because I think there's plenty more opportunity to talk about bike fit again.
Definitely.
So thank you for being on the show, Pat. Look forward to the next time.
Thank you, Heather.